Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is your buddy, Ryan Singer. I'm very excited to be coming from the watering hole in the astral plane. I think that's what I'm calling this new recording studio space that we just moved into. Today we've this is it's a party. This is a paranormal party. Usually the interviews are, one-on-one. We've got a group of three of us today, and there's something very specific maybe that we're going to get into as far as like a new project that has been released or is being released currently. We're going to talk about the slaughter sessions. Um, we'll get into a little bit of that, but we're also just we're gonna meet a new friend. We're gonna talk with one of my my favorite best paranormal buddies. So we've got Matthew Jackson, also aka Evil Ogleville, paraholics.com, ITC researcher, just opens your eyes to all kinds of like new avenues and understandings of the paranormal, which I always appreciate and love. And for the first time we're meeting, I'm getting to meet, luckily through Matthew, April Slaughter, author. I mean, a couple different books, right? We've got. Let me get this correct here. I just want to make sure I'm getting these books right. Beyond the Veil, unlocking the mystery of modern spirit communication, and then we've also got Disconnected from Death, which so the author of two books, some really badass skull artwork. You can go to aprilslaughter.com and you can check out the links for all these kinds of things. And also an ITC researcher. Very excited to get them both on the same show so we can talk about their current project a little bit and then everything else. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Just as a side note, there's actually three books. They're just not all listed on my website. So
what's the third one
not
called?
that it's a big deal, but my first book was Ghost Hunting Texas. So there's three out right now and a couple more in the works. So.
Oh, hell yeah. Well, that's great. I mean, I don't know anyone who's ever tried to write a book, who might be listening to this, understands what a daunting task that is, to even just make the time to sit down and be disciplined to write, let alone to have multiple publishings. That's pretty badass.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. They are a lot of work. I think it's a lot harder than most people realize it is to put together an article, let alone a book. So, but it is something that I love outside of just doing the paranormal research. That is the avenue I've used mostly to share my work. So it's something I really enjoy to do.
Cool. Now, how did you and Matthew meet each other? Was it through the ITC research commonalities, or what happened there? How did this collaboration start?
Well, he reached out to me several years ago. Forgive me if I get the details incorrect, Matthew, but I had just published Reaching Beyond the Veil, which was a book centered mostly on my ITC research. And so he reached out to me and we just began a friendship and kind of just a kind of a peer review type situation. And ever since then, we've just kind of bounced things off each other. We've investigated with each other a couple of times, and I've just kept up with his work like he's kept up with mine over the years.
April's book really made a huge impact on me, especially myself being raised in a very religious household and hearing April share her stories from being raised in a pretty religious household and trying to find when you're kind of raised to think that anything paranormal is evil, dark, strange, and satanic and those type of things, to have somebody really kind of spell out their feelings and viewpoints from a fresh perspective was really helpful for me to try to reconcile some things in my mind. So when I first reached out to her, not only I was very appreciative of her writing the book, but also, when she really got into those matters outside of just regular ITC, I just felt compelled to say thank you. And yeah, we just kind of became pals from that point.
That's really cool. And I mean, I guess it's the three of us have that in common over here, being raised in a pretty staunch Catholic household and going to Catholic school for 12 years and having grandparents who were as saintly as you could be, as actually flawed human beings. I'm curious about the moment, like maybe a watershed moment. Maybe we'll go to April on this one to touch a little bit on that. Was there a moment that sticks out to you personally, maybe more so than others, where maybe like some real doubt crept in about whether or not this, paranormal phenomena was actually evil, or looking into it was not something you're supposed to do? Was there any moment that like you were like, you know what, I think there's more to this than what I've been possibly raised to believe or taught?
Sure. I was raised in an LDS or Mormon household, and anything to do with ghosts or spirits it wasn't really talked about in the religion in my experience growing up, but it was joked about, just kind of something that you brought into conversation around Halloween time. It wasn't something that you brought up around the kitchen table. And I recognized it might have happened a lot sooner, but when I was 8 years old, I recognized that I was seeing and talking to people in the house that nobody else was seeing or talking to. And so I wanted to know more about it. I was scared to death of what was happening. I was the most frightened child you would have ever met. Everything scared me. I didn't want to try anything new. So certainly I was really worried that something was paying attention to me in the house, or people were paying attention to me in the house. And I did not want that attention, because I was told that you just don't communicate with spirits. And if you were communicating with spirits or seeing them, it was something negative or evil. And it just didn't evolve that way in my life. Actually, something that really scared me became very protective of me in my childhood home. Real quick example, there was a night that I was home by myself. I hated being alone by myself at night, or even in the daytime. I just hated it. And I was by myself, the youngest of four kids. I was probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 9 or 10. And I was in the basement, and I was in the room where the back door came in to the basement from the house. And I noticed someone jiggling the handle from the outside. And it was probably about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And we didn't have air conditioning at the time. We just had, so all the windows were open all the time, especially in the summer. And this was about summertime. And I knew that if someone was wanting to get into the house, they were going to be able to, because the windows were all open. And so I bolted upstairs to grab the phone, because it was, landline back then. And I went to get the phone. And when I got to the top of the stairs, every window had been shut and locked. All the curtains had been drawn, and the deadbolt on the front door had been locked. And we'd never even had a key from the previous owners to the deadbolt of the house. So I watched every door. Someone tried to go to every door of the house, trying to get in and try the windows, and they were not able to get in. And by the time the police came, they were gone. But I was able to call the police. And I just thought, instead of being afraid of what's in the house, I became afraid of what was outside of the house. And I just felt safe. I felt more safe by whatever the spirit was in the house than I was calling the police.
Wow.
Yeah.
That, I mean, I can go back to being that age in my mind. And I was very scared of anything scary, like images. Like I couldn't even see images on a piece of paper when I was that age, or I'd have nightmares of that image later that night.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when it comes to thinking about this now, do we think it was a person, or do we think it maybe was something else other that was trying to get in, or do you think it was just a person?
Well, I think it was a person. It was probably more than one. When my parents bought the house, I was 8. So this was only a couple years after we moved in that this incident happened. And they bought it from an old couple who just couldn't take care of it anymore. And so when my mom was touring the house, trying to decide if she was going to buy it, she asked the lady that lived there. She's like, "Wow, your house is so clean. Like, how do you keep up with that?" And she said, "Well, that's a priority because angels pass through here." And my mom was just kind of like, "Okay." Senality, is kind of set in. Maybe she's a little cuckoo or whatever. She didn't pay much attention to that. Well, as I started to recognize that there was people, or whatever was taking the form of people, in the house, sometimes I'd see the same person for years. Sometimes I'd see new people. I'd even see animals. It was like a train station in the basement of the house. So in the very first chapter of Reaching Beyond the Veil, I call it the people in the basement, because there were always people in the basement, and that's where my bedroom was. Um, as time went on, I started noticing things not just in the basement, obviously. That's just where I got to first experience spirits in the house. But the house was haunted, but not in a, there was never a negative sense to it. There was never anything trying to frighten me. It was just my perception of it in the beginning frightened me. Um, the very first experience I had in the house at all, before a bedroom door was put on my room, I saw something in the hallway that was massive. It couldn't have been well, I mean, it could be a human spirit masquerading as something else, or something else masquerading as a human spirit, but it was massive. And it said my name. And I pulled my covers up over my head and I prayed and prayed and prayed like I was always told to do, and it went away. But it terrified me. And as time went on, I thought, well, if I'm going to be afraid of something, I better learn everything I can about it. And so I just started devouring every piece of information, every book, every article, kind of hoarding it without my family being able to pay much attention to it, because they would just tease me. They'd say, oh, okay, April, seeing people in the basement, that kind of a thing. And so they just kind of made fun of me for a long time until I got married and moved away. And then it started paying attention, or they started paying attention to other people in the house. And it's still that way to this day. My dad lives in the home still. And when I go over there, sometimes things kick up, like a recognition of, hey, April. And other times he'll call me and say, oh, I heard something, but it must have been a raccoon in the attic. I'm like, okay, Dad, raccoons don't make like musical notes knocking on the wall, like, in rhythmic to tunes. So he passed it off for a long time, but now my family has become very open to it. Now that they've all kind of experienced it. My mom passed away last June, but she and I discussed many things about the paranormal and what I did, and how she would communicate with me through devices. If she could, she would do everything she could to speak with me after she passed away, and she has.
Oh my God.
So
That's a
yeah,
great
I mean, it gives me
allusion to
chills even
something
to
as
tell
well.
you about that. But she passed away in the home, but I don't think she's haunting the home. If anything, she's kind of tagging along with me, because other people in my family aren't really open to getting signs or communications from her, because they just think it's their imagination, or it's something masquerading as my mother, the typical reactions to these things. But ever since I was 8 years old, it's just happened to me. I didn't ask for it. People say, why did you choose the paranormal as sort of your career path? I'm like, I didn't choose it. It chose me. It absolutely chose me. And I have no idea why, but I am no longer afraid of it in any sense. So that's the positive takeaway for me.
Yeah, that's really fascinating too, to consider the going back to the first story, the first part of that, about everything being closed and locked up, and which is the opposite of what someone would think a haunted house. Like most people, when they think of haunted house, they think of like, oh, there's a dark energy, nefarious, something's playing tricks on us, something's teasing or taunting us. And this
Right.
was actually like, we're locking this place down because we protect what is here.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear. Now I'm interested, Matthew, if you've had that kind of interaction when it comes to, I mean, because we've covered various topics in previous conversations that we've had on the show, and also just in real life, but where, if there's any kind of protection aspect in your experiences as well with the unknown or the paranormal, or energies or entities you've encountered.
I don't really think that I've felt observed. I've definitely felt like I've had some familiars, some regulars that like to drop by. Like I'm running a tavern down here in my basement in Brown County because some of the same characters seem to like
You
to
got Cliff and Norm
swing
hanging
through.
out all the time.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, but I can't really say that I've felt like I've been, had anything to look over. I've tried some like intention experiments to try to, talk to like grandparents that I was very close to that have passed and things like that. And that always seems to come to me more so than dreams than in devices. So, but yeah, no, not really, not to the extent that April just described. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's a fascinating aspect because I've never experienced something like that either, where I felt like there was something else there, and it was, and I guess to clarify, I mean something that I didn't call in on purpose in a moment, right? Whether it is some kind of protective energy because I needed it because I felt anxious and or scared for some reason. That's a little bit different, I think, maybe than being in a situation that is scary and then all of a sudden realize there is something there without us like actively, being like, okay, I'm going to summon some protective energies, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
making a formal request for something to come in. And
I
you,
have, I'm
or no,
sorry,
go
but
ahead. You
I
have
have
what?
had experiences where I'll be talking to a spirit and another spirit will like interject themselves in the moment and say, they're lying. Don't listen to them. I
Oh,
have had that happen before. So that's kind of a way of maybe somebody looking out for me, I guess. Like, don't believe that one. That's a tricky one. So
like I just love the fact that there's like spirit snitches, right?
Oh, totally.
Like just snitching on people, snitching on
yeah.
other spirits or entity or
Yeah, I mean,
entities.
and they were like playing with me, like Matthew, they're lying. That's not the father, because a spirit was pretending to be it was a residential case. It was saying the name of the deceased father and trying to pass himself off as that, and this other spirit was like not having it. So it was interesting.
That is interesting. And
Yeah,
I think sometimes I'll forget that, especially when we're dealing with, if it's a spirit that was a human spirit at one point, right? And I'm of the belief that our consciousness is, our personality and all these other things, right? And then it moves on, past the physical form when it's no longer here. But their personalities are very complex. And I guess sometimes I forget, and it'll take me by surprise when like a spirit or an entity like clearly is jerking me around like for fun. And it it's refreshing when that happens. And anything that we can do when we're alive, I suppose we can do potentially, after in death, when if we were choosing to communicate. Now I do want to circle back to April, the conversation you had with your mom, because I want to talk about shadows in the static,
Sure.
the ITC collaboration project that there's 2 episodes out so far. I've watched them both, listened to them both, experienced them both. I think is a better way of maybe describing it. Um,
Hmm.
it's really fascinating, this project, and there's lots of different aspects I love about how it's being approached and what's happening. But and I think there is an allusion to maybe those conversations you had with your mom before she passed,
Yeah.
that come into play during the Shadows and the Static project. And so I'm just going to let you guys tell me as much as you can about, because there's aspects of this that we can't discuss. Um,
Correct.
but whatever we can discuss, I'd love for the listeners to hear more about it, um, and about this really cool project that you're doing.
Sure. Well, this isn't something that I've discussed with anything other than Matthew as of yet. So uh, I was asked to film at Skinwalker for the show. I can't discuss anything that happened during that time because I've signed the appropriate paperwork for that. But when I was asked to do that, I was already utilizing ITC devices in my own home. I've been using ITC for 20 years in some variation, at least. And having connected with Matthew, there was a particular device that I wanted to borrow for that excursion because I wanted to showcase how ITC works. It was something that I really wanted to do. And so he agreed to let me borrow that particular ITC device. Now, without giving any specifics to the ranch, prior to going, which I just discussed this with Matthew, prior to actually going out there, I did a lot of communicating here at home or wherever I wanted to. Honestly, I don't think ITC is something that you should just do on investigations or is limited to haunted, quote unquote, haunted locations. But anyway, I was told years ago that that connection was going to provide something significant to my research, my friendship with Matthew. So I just asked if I could borrow a particular device. He allowed me to do that. But in my own ITC research that I did not record, and there's a reason why I don't record all of my ITC sessions when I'm not on an investigation. I was told that I needed to work with him through the devices. And so I'd never told him that. I just kept doing what I was doing. And he allowed me the device and the space to do that. To go back, when I first really got into ITC research, I reached out to someone you may have heard of. His name was Frank Sumption. And he was someone who lived in Littleton, Colorado, who was he was a ham radio operator who was building ghost boxes out of random parts and things. And I had learned of him, and I reached out to him and said, Frank, will you build me a box and I will pay you for part shipping, whatever. And he did not politely, but he very adamantly and negatively declined, pretty much told me where to go. He had no interest in building anything for me until he started getting box recordings saying, build one for April Slaughter. He didn't want to do it. He started sending me recordings, and I ended up with 3 original Frank's boxes before he passed away. And like I said, he didn't sign up. He didn't want to do that for me, but the boxes wouldn't leave him alone.
What? I mean, there's a lot here that I'm curious about, obviously, but
go ahead, ask away.
Was there a specific reason that he cited, or just kind of like being like a curmudgeon about it?
Well, no, he was definitely a curmudgeon. He had been so many people. He really was. He would own it too. Frank, it took a long time for Frank to be considered my friend, but he had been bombarded by people to build these things. And
got it. Okay.
He had his own kind of strange ideology about his personality. He believed he was a purple alien princess reincarnated. Like, seriously, the guy was hilarious, but he was grumpy. He just didn't want to get involved in the ghost box side of it. This was something that he did that he felt he was supposed to do. And he shared it. And then people, wanted their own devices. This was even before things like the Ovilus and whatnot came out. So he was really the only one actively building and letting people know that he had these devices. So he started sending me EVP clips or ITC clips of the boxes, taunting him to build and send me.
That's devices. Really funny that he would send those to you.
Yeah, for free. He wouldn't take a cent for any of it because he was told he shouldn't, I guess.
That's amazing.
And so we became friends not quickly, but through time we became friends. And he and I started collaborating with other ITC builders, researchers. One of my mentors, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, passed away a few years ago. She took me under her wing when I was learning everything, when I was really scared of this stuff, when I was really young. And so she kind of dove in with me, and I introduced her and Frank Sumption personally at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado.
Oh, wow. What a great, would have been a fly on the wall for that meeting. I mean, Rosemary's
amazing.
book on the gin really kind of blew my mind when I first got my hands on that years ago. That's really cool. Now, real quick before we're moving on, Matthew, I want to jump in here real quick because you you enlightened me or illuminated me on something very interesting about the origins of the Frank's box, right? As far as like the intention when Frank started making originally, they weren't for ghosts, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, April would probably know the history better than I, but the story I was always taught was he was a little surprised when people got his devices and started talking to quote unquote ghosts because he was talking to aliens. And the Frank's boxes I've managed to get my hands on in the past or see, I mean, he would draw on them, and a lot of the drawings I think correlated to like star systems and little spaceships and stars, shooting stars, and so forth. So he was very much, I think, in that mindset.
That's really cool. And I guess and it's something that I'd never heard. Although now I want the biography of Frank to be written. Um,
Oh, he wrote it. I have it.
oh, he
He
wrote
wrote
it.
it himself.
Do you have like
Yeah.
the only copy?
He emailed it to me. I printed a couple. It's probably been, oh, I don't know. I mean, probably a good 12 years. 12 years ago. But yeah, he wrote it himself, and he even sent me like how to build your own. But like he released it to me long before he passed away. I think that was something else he didn't. I don't know why he gave it to me, but something the box told him he needed to do. So he did send that to me. I don't. I know I could. I know I still have it somewhere, but I could provide you a copy once. I didn't even think about it, but
That would
once
be
we
amazing.
finish, I'm happy to send it.
That'd be amazing. And
Yeah.
the idea that if let me see if I can get this right, that he was a reincarnated purple princess alien. I think
Yes.
that's something that you said. It makes sense about the original intention going into the box is to communicate with aliens. He's trying to communicate with, his family, his people, right? Quote unquote.
100%.
Real quick before we continue the conversation, God, I feel like I cannot believe it's already been almost 30 minutes.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
I need to jump in here real quick with some commercials. And just as a reminder for people, you can go to patreon.com/Ryan Singer and you can get ad-free interviews, episodes, all that good stuff. If you don't like capitalism as much as I don't like capitalism, but yeah, we are children of capitalism, so we must live in capitalism. No commercials over there. So patreon.com/Ryan Singer, $3 a month, no commercials ever. So we'll be right back. And we're back. Okay, so wow, we haven't even gotten into the main heart of the conversation necessarily quite yet, but I get derailed and distracted quite easily, as Matthew would tell you, just from knowing me. But so let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about Frank Sumption, and we were talking about April's relationship with him, from curmudgeon to reluctantly having to build some Frank's boxes for you, as directed from the great beyond or from the great other, wherever these messages were coming from. And the ITC, research, and what the great meeting between Frank and Rosemary Ellen Guiley at the Stanley Hotel. I mean, what a cool moment that would be as well. And we're talking about your project that you're collaborating with
Right.
Matthew on, Shadows in the Static, that involves
Right.
Skinwalker Ranch and ITC devices.
Right. I knew from doing my ITC research personally that he would be the person to do something with. And since we don't live in the same state, I reached out. I said, hey, what do you think about trying to do something remotely? At the time, it was okay for me to tell people that I had been to Skinwalker Ranch. I just didn't talk about it a whole lot. And that stems from fear, something that happened to me about 15 years ago during my initial introduction to the property, which is crazy in and of itself. But I reached out to Matthew and said, hey, you don't know as much as I happen to because of my experience out on the ranch. So if I send you a list of questions, are you willing to fire up whatever devices you want to try and see if we can get some answers that I can validate from that? And so he was willing to jump on board for whatever reason. He was willing to work with me. I'm glad he was. But we've done the 2 sessions so far. We do have a third planned, but we'll see how that goes.
That's really cool. And I love this idea. And I don't know the terminology exactly, but it reminds me of what did they call them? Like double blind studies, where Matthew doesn't know the answers you're looking for. He doesn't know what the answers to these questions. He doesn't get the questions in advance. He gets the questions and then does the session, right? With the ITC device. And then the answers that come through, he would have no knowledge if that's the answer you're looking for. So I love the idea of this being the procedure here. And now, Matthew, tell me a little bit about your side of this, of the project.
When she first pitched me the idea, and I said that I would definitely be willing to try it, down in my little bunker area where I like to do my cabin sessions and so forth, and we've had fun talking about those. I really didn't know if anything would really happen, and I'm a firm believer of all people that ITC is not location specific, that type of work. So I was hopeful that maybe something would happen, and so I decided to get a little kooky with this new box that I just got that has a little light that projects through this crystal, and I thought, well, this would be fun to just to try. And I went ahead and she sent me the questions, and I didn't really think through. It was almost like a tester session for me to see if anything would really work or fire off or connect. And so I just went through and I noted everything, and I sent her the results. And then I got sent back a list of responses that I had to redact. And before any of it could be like publicly released, I was like, oh man, so some things must have hit pretty close to home. So of course, I'm not as stupid as I look. So I'm thinking, well, I'm onto something here, which made me really excited. I mean, because I'm sure if it was a flop, it would have went no further. But by the fact that obviously there were some interesting points and some things that were a little sensitive that couldn't be shared to the public, at that point, I was all in. So by the time I got to the second session, I that's where you see I really kind of broke out a little bit more of the devices and started thinking through things like I've set up more for my cabin sessions just to make it a little bit more interesting visually on my end. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about all this. And it's a little frustrating, to be honest, because, not having a mindset or like knowing what I should hear, you have this anticipation of like, please say black, or whatever you think the answer is going to be. And to not really know and to kind of take myself out of the equation, I really feel like I'm just a vessel. I'm a pawn in all this. I'm like a physical medium being taken over. I'm just waiting for the ectoplasm to come out of my ears during a session. So it's been really fun, and I haven't really felt any pressure by it either, because I kind of feel like I'm just assisting in something bigger, and I don't feel like this is all on me, but I'm just really thrilled to be able to contribute to the project, and I'm glad it's getting some attention because I think it's really unique.
Yeah, it's really cool. And there's a couple of things I want to touch on here. First of all, when you said you were a pawn, I swear I saw something fly behind you.
Behind
him.
him.
Just been a glare. Do you saw that as well?
I saw that too. I was going to say something, but I didn't want to interrupt. So
yeah, over your left or behind your left shoulder.
It's kind of a yellowish or orange from what I could tell.
Yeah. And
yeah,
so
well, behind me is a wall of ITC devices. So who knows who's trying to get your attention.
He's being very humble, but I'm telling you, it wasn't just me that made this decision to include him and doing these remote sessions. And that the slaughter, he named it. I said, what should we call this? He said, let's call it the slaughter sessions. I mean, I do have a pretty cool last name. So it worked, but I didn't come up with Shadows in the Static. That was through my own ITC work. It told me what to title it, I guess. And doing these remotely with Matthew, and the box is saying, this needs to go further. You need to share this. I was reluctant to share it with people who actually are intrinsically involved with the ranch itself. I have great friends that caretake and live on the ranch, Tom Lewis and Candace Lindy, and I shared it with them. And they shared it with the owner of the ranch, Brandon Fugel, who has, I'm just going to make this announcement here because it seemed like a good time. Not only have I been invited to do research on the ranch publicly with ITC, Matthew has as well. So that is something that is going to be in the very near future. I can't say when, but it will move from being remote experiments to on-property experiments.
Which is really cool. And,
Huge.
you know, so it be said, so it be done. You know, it comes through the box and so it shall be, right? I mean, there's just this really interesting, because here, before I forget this, we're talking about everything, or, you know, Matthew, we're talking about things that need to be redacted, and there's obviously things that are sensitive, and, you know, that, you know, and documents have been signed. So what you're telling me is everything that you see in the first two episodes or installments, all the hits that you're getting are like, sorry, I'm a little dumbfounded here, because like these are hits that you're getting, but they're not specifically needing to be redacted. Is that what you're telling me? Because there's some stuff, there was moments in the second one, specifically in the second one, when it comes to, when we alluded to it earlier, to, if I'm not mistaken here, April, your mom. Yeah. And Matthew is reading these questions in the dark. He said the name incorrectly, if I'm not mistaken. And through the box, the correct name comes through. And then he realizes a minute or so later, like, let me look at this again. Oh, shoot, I was, you know, and then he says and in the moment, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't, obviously, I mean, anyone who's ever done research like this knows that you just can't remember and hear everything in the moment, right? That's coming through. Did you even know that the correct name was correct? It was almost as if it was correcting you through the box.
When it said, I think it said he corrected it.
It's bonkers. I mean, it's like,
yeah,
my roommate probably thought I was losing my mind because I'm just in my room, like it's at night, and I'm just going, what? No way. You know, like, it's like one of those really fun moments when you're watching something like this, and it's captivating, it's engaging, and it touches a part of us. It touches a part of our curiosity. And I think and Matthew, you know this about me, that I'm all about the collective unconscious and the connectivity between all of us and all things through that web of consciousness. And you feel tapped in, almost like when an insect, you know, walks on the far reaches of a spider's web. The spider feels that vibration and knows that someone is here. Like, this is how I feel when I'm watching this series that you're making. It's connecting. It resonates, if that makes sense.
You know, and when the moment, go ahead.
No, I'm just like, it flabbergasted. Like I'm like reliving it in the moment. I'm like kind of flabbergasted. Like, and I think I've used the word flabbergasted maybe 4 times in my entire life, and I don't know if I'm even using it correctly. But it's just like, and this is the stuff you're allowed to keep in. That,
well, April and I had to talk about it, because I you know, with my work, I really don't ever want to come across as being exploitive. You know, especially when it comes to like anything sensitive. You know, family, whatever. And when I listened and I reviewed it, I was like, holy cow, because I definitely heard a female voice. And of course, you know, April asked before, you know, she saw the video, did my mom come through? And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be the one to validate that. You're going to have to hear it. And I was pretty certain that, you know, we might have to remove that because of the way that it worked out, and me fumbling her name versus her nickname, and how that all came about, even though it was profound and blew my mind. I mean, I was more than willing to take it out of the video, but, you know, April, you know, she talked about it, and we discussed it, and we let it go. So,
well, yeah, it's something that's important to me. I mean, the ghost hunting thing, aliens, whatever you're into in the paranormal, as far as investigating, or if you're a hobbyist, or, to me, it is all encompassing. So this is not this is not something light to me. So the fact that I had had conversations with my mother prior to her passing that everyone in my family knew about, everyone was aware of what my career is, what I believe, it to me it was important to leave that in, as not necessarily to prove to my family or even to myself that it's possible, but my entire motivation behind what I do is to allow people the space to believe that you never truly lose anyone, that they don't just cease to exist. It is very important to me that people keep that connection. And so when my mother's voice came through, and that was not the first time since she passed away, it was the second time I've heard her voice in this work since she passed away. The first time was on a public ghost hunt, and I ended up in a puddle of tears in
Wow.
front of an entire group of people because I didn't. It's not that I didn't expect it. It's just the timing was strange to me. Right after my mom had passed away, I hadn't touched a box for any of the ITC devices or even did any EVP work for months, because I know that what I hear, having whatever medium mystic ability I do in my head, as opposed to using the boxes and hearing a voice that way, they don't sound the same in your head or to your heart. So I wasn't ready to hear that voice outside of myself, I guess is the best way to explain that, at the time that she first came through. But I knew it was a possibility that she was probably going to come through, especially about the ranch, because I had planned to take my mom. She was a huge fan of the show. She wanted to see the property before she passed away. And she was granted permission to come out and see it, but unfortunately passed away before I was able to take her out there. And so I knew that in this work I'm doing with Matthew, if I asked her to make herself known, that the likelihood was that yes, she was going to do everything she could to do that. And I didn't tell him anything about her nickname. I didn't even think to. So as soon as he sent that to me, before anybody else saw it, I was like, okay, that's it. Like that's my mom. That's my mom. So it was important to me to leave it in, regardless of how anyone else feels about it, because it makes it feel like, yep, mom's showing up for me and she's backing up the fact that we can communicate this way. And it's hugely important to me. And, she really had nothing to do with the ranch, so I didn't have to legally redact that at all. And I think she's going to come through probably every session I do everywhere. She'll at least try to, because she knows she can, and that communication avenue is open to her.
That's really
I think
cool.
what's also cool about the way that April's structured the questions, because most of the questions that I'm asking kind of pertain to people's various people, not just hers, but various people's experiences or things that they know about the property. And some of the questions are about her experiences as well. So I mean, these are not like things like, what year did this happen, or anything that you could Google search or find an answer to. I mean, I'm really just kind of going at this totally blind. So I think it's cool. It's more experience based moments versus those types of details versus just like facts that you could find out about the ranch or something like that. So I think that makes it even that much more profound.
I agree with that 100%. And I am firmly entrenched. And I say that knowing that I've completely 180'd on so many different things in my life, but I am firmly entrenched at this time that experience is evidence. And, to experience something is evidence of this thing. And so to get right to the heart of the matter, I mean, for me, that's a beautiful aspect of this. You're getting right to the heart of the matter. It's all
Absolutely.
experiential.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love, April, what you've touched on here as well. When you're talking about the paranormal, ghosts, aliens being all encompassing as well. But I think oftentimes we can forget that even though it is a very personal thing that we're doing when we're on an investigation on many levels, but when it becomes and resonates personal, it doesn't matter how many or how long you've been doing this or what you've experienced in the past. It can really knock our socks off when something speaks right to our heart, so to speak. um during these moments. And I mean, I can think of, a friend of mine who's a psychic. One time at a comedy club, just walked up behind me and said, wait, uh, your grandpa's standing right here. And it was like right before a show. And I was like, what? And she described my grandpa, and I was just like, and I almost started crying. I was like, you can't make me cry right now. I'm getting ready to go on stage. But it was like totally unexpected. But it's one of those things where even if I was, tried to like stop myself to be prepared to not be emotional, I couldn't have done it. Because it was too real in that moment. I mean, I don't know where all of this is going to go. It's very exciting news that the two of you are going to be there continuing this work. And we don't have to get into like details about any of that stuff. Sure. Because I feel like that's getting into like, oh, well, I can talk about this, I can talk about that. But and for anybody who has watched the show already, I've seen the first two seasons. It's really well made. It's a really well made show. That and Expedition Bigfoot are probably the two shows that I think are presented in the best way that I've seen in recent history. I mean, everybody knows I'm a fan of Hellier as well, but the so those three for me are probably like, the top three in the last 5 years or so. But what we have here is we have a location that is super famous for phenomena. And you had, or can you tell me a little bit about, did you have any history whatsoever previous with this location, or just that general area as well?
So Skinwalker Ranch sits in the Uinta Basin. The ranch itself is over 500 acres, and it sits in the middle of the Ute Indian Reservation. So growing up, pretty much every summer, I would go and spend summers with my aunt and uncle who lived out there, who had 4 kids and needed help in the summertime. And when I wasn't in school growing up, I would spend my summers out in the basin, is what they refer to that area. So the ranch isn't the only place in the basin that has activity. The entire basin has history with different paranormal phenomena. So I didn't actually step foot onto the property. Let me just make that clear. I was on the perimeter many times in my life up to this point. The time I had the closest experience was 15 years ago, when I stayed on the southern edge of the border on property that I was allowed to be on. I don't advocate trespassing at all. So I'd stayed just on the edge and kind of viewed the property before it had as much, security and gating and things like it does today. But I have had several experiences near the ranch growing up that were just beyond anything, even growing up in a haunted house and seeing things that I just didn't understand. I couldn't put a name to. So I think when I did step foot onto the property, initially I was terrified because I'd had sort of like a Men in Black moment after my first sort of intrigue with the ranch, where I had people approach me in public and tell me never to go back. That happened a few months after I camped out on the southern end of the
Was this
property.
the 15 years ago thing you were talking about?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and I wrote about it, a series of articles, when I used to work for Jason and Grant from the Ghost Hunters, the original show Ghost Hunters. They had a magazine called Taps Para Magazine. So I don't know if you can see that very well here, but that was the issue that I wrote, the Skinwalker series, and nobody really paid that much attention to it back then. But when production started and the TV show gained popularity and production reached out to me, I was like, I don't know that I want to go back there. I had people tell me never to go back there.
Wow.
Or who appeared to be people. I don't know. I had young twin babies, and I was like, I'm not going to mess with that. If I'm told not to go back there, I'm not going to go back there. So when the invite came, I was like, I'm not sure I want to do this. But it turned out to be a totally positive thing to go back. But yeah, no, it's that whole area of the Uinta Basin just has a really rich history. I think people need to pay attention to it beyond just the scope of the show.
Yeah, I don't think Phenomena really cares cares very much at all about man-made lines on a map,
Right.
or plot or lot lines,
Exactly.
as far as property taxes go.
Yeah.
It
Well,
doesn't.
that for sure.
It doesn't. Yeah. So that is interesting. Matthew, have you, in your experience, I mean, April, you talked about it earlier. You mentioned something which is interesting too, because I want to maybe circle back to it before we put a bow on all
Sure.
of this, about how terrifying you were talking about, how terrifying that experience was. And I'm not sure that we have the time tonight or today to get into like maybe a full detailed version of that story.
Sure.
But very early on in the conversation, you said that you're not afraid of the paranormal anymore, or
No.
like it doesn't associate fear. So I want to circle back. I want to put a pin in that for a second, so
Okay.
we can come back to that, because I'd be interested to know how you got there. But in the meantime, Matthew, this would be your first trip to the ranch,
Oh
where
yeah,
you go
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Um,
definitely.
do you have? I don't know. I mean, I don't know the best way to ask this question, which is an awful thing to say as someone who's interviewing you and supplying questions. But is there any, do you feel, that was a Freudian slip. Do you fear any hesitancy? Do you feel any hesitancy or have any reservations? I mean, because I think there is a lot, it's kind of a charged location when it comes to just having connotations attached to the name and everything else. What are your initial thoughts?
To be honest, I just honestly have no expectation. I'm not like, I'm more like concerned and worried about getting my stuff out there and my stuff working and those type of things versus being concerned about my location. I'm just so fascinated by the where I'm getting to go and the opportunity, and I'm approaching it like I do anything concerning the phenomena. Just I have literally, I'm clear. I have no expectation of what may or may not happen, and I think that also calms fears or anything like that. I mean, I'm not saying that I wouldn't buy into it, or I refuse to believe, or I'm being a skeptic, or I don't really believe that anything's going on there or anything like that. I'm just kind of excited and open to whatever. So I'm just going forward. Don't know, go.
Don't know, go. And to steal a
Yeah.
line from your website, I'm actually going to direct quote you here, regarding the slaughter sessions, Shadows in the Static, part of the description for volume 2. It says, quote, "Per usual, I have no clue what I'm doing." End quote. I'm glad I was able to get that in there.
I'm never disappointed. I'm never disappointed.
If I could just interject one thing, when you ask him if he's like hesitant or has any sort of expectation or fear, two things to consider. One, he's been invited. So it's been discussed among the people who live on the ranch that are intrinsically involved that he specifically come. And two, he wouldn't be asked if he didn't have an immense air of respect about the work that he does. And he really deserves more attention for his approach and for his respect for the entire genre. So I really don't think he has anything to worry about. It's like I told him, the ranch will let him know if he's welcome or not. And I know he will be. I know the ranch will welcome him.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, Jim Perry, host of Euphemet, who was in Los Angeles for WrestleMania a couple weeks ago, we're hanging out. And Matthew, I think I alluded to this. Jim Perry and I were having that exact same conversation about Matthew,
Yep.
about how it's one of these things where we believe it's inevitable that his name becomes synonymous, or it's not very many breaths away from being mentioned when it comes to ITC work. And a lot of respect, and for considering how much respect and admiration he has for you as well. That goes a really long way. I think it's a two-way street, I think, between the two of you here, which is really cool, which makes this project so So cool. And I got to tell people, and Matthew, it's on your YouTube, correct? Like that's where it's been released. I mean, it's on
Yeah.
paraholics.com. And just a heads up, trying to click through to the YouTube outside of the website, there was an error message, and it might have been my browser, but you
Mm,
might just want to go double check that, make sure it's not being buggy.
okay.
But you can go to Paraholics on YouTube, or you can go to paraholics.com, and you can see the first two volumes of Shadows in the Static, the Slaughter Sessions. I mean, I'm when it comes to like the respect that obviously the people who, like, whether it's Brandon Fugel or the other people who live there and work there and are personally invested in just having a livelihood, just in general, um, to want to earnestly get to the heart of the matter.
Mhm.
It's sure, it's a television show, that's fine, that's a thing, but at the end of the day, it's a place. And you were talking about your friends Tom and Candace who live there and are
Mhm.
caretakers of the property. This is their life, right? And
Yes, yeah.
and Brandon Fugel may have purchased the property because he was intensely fascinated with the phenomena that happens there. But guess what? Now he pays a mortgage on this place,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, and this is his place, but there is something to be said about just trying to glimpse, even if it's just 3% more of an understanding, right? Which would be enormous, in my opinion,
Mhm.
uh, from what we understand now,
Mhm.
in the way it connects to phenomena in general across the globe, not just specifically this location. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious if, from what I've seen, and I just don't know how much ITC has been utilized, at least officially through them, Brandon, the current owner, and up to this point. And I've only seen the first two seasons. I think there's probably a third season that's out. I just don't. I gotta get my subscriptions, my streaming subscriptions, up to date to be able to do it. But um,
Yep.
am I wrong in thinking that ITC has not been utilized in this fashion?
No, no, you're not wrong. I what I can say is, ever since I was invited back, uh, particularly dealing with the possibility of being on the show, um, I have been doing ITC work. Now I can't release what that is without, because speaking with Matthew about going forward with these sessions, we have to allow those intrinsically involved to see the information first, and as they should. We're being invited. This isn't something we're entitled to. And so Eric Bard, the guy on the show that does all the technical stuff, he's fascinating. I remember staying and talking to him for hours and hours and hours after I was done doing the ITC work just for that one day. And he said something about how he wanted to see a quote unquote constellation of facts. And so I think ITC had not been explored previous to me, at least to my knowledge. I can't speak for everybody there, but I can say that they are fascinated with it now, and they are exploring that with me and Matthew. So that is the first I am aware of, that people have been invited out to actively use ITC as another research avenue on property.
That's really cool. And I mean, it takes a specific kind of person to lock into ITC work. And I think for me, I have the hard. I'm one of those people who has the hard time hearing stuff. Once I hear it 10 times, okay, now I can kind of hear it, right? I don't have the ITC ear, necessarily, except when things come through, like and like the first two episodes, there's a couple things that come through and I'm just like, uh like, you had to, you definitely heard that in the moment, right? Like, and then you'll make a response where it's like, oh yeah, okay, even I heard. So like, for me, it's like, if I'm hearing it,
Mhm.
right, to me, that's pretty compelling. Not because I'm a skeptic necessarily, but it's just I think it's just a quality of hearing issue as opposed to it has nothing to do with skeptical beliefs. But um, okay, so I'm very excited about all this, and I can't wait to like maybe revisit this conversation and have updates in the future, when and if that can happen. But to put a bow on all of this, because I know for a lot of people, when it comes to Skinwalker Ranch, it's a terrifying prospect to be on the property when it just because of all the stories throughout the years that have been told of this place. I scare very easily. I've had a terrifying experience myself in a location that has similar qualities to a place like Skinwalker Ranch in Florida, and I've been in therapy for almost 3 years ever since. But so I'm fascinated to circle back and put a bow on the you getting to a place, April, where you're no longer afraid, or
Right.
where I'm trying to remember exactly how you said it.
It was in order to remove fear, I had to learn everything I could about it. So knowledge is the thing, and experience is the thing that has really broken me out of. I actually miss being scared. I miss going on ghost hunts or investigations and getting that rush of, ooh, this is creepy, right? I get that far. I do get afraid. I get the fear, but it has nothing to do with paranormal phenomenon. It's the living that terrified me, and that I worry about medical stuff. You know, a lot of things that we all have to deal with in our lifetimes. But paranormal phenomena does not scare me anymore, and I think it's just because I've dove into it head first and allowed myself the space to make wrong decisions and be taught, what is appropriate, what's not appropriate, not because a television show says it or does it. It's just my own personal experience, and I love sharing that with people, and I've loved sharing it with Matthew. So going forward on this, I have zero fear that it's going to work out well. I am 100% optimistic, and I just know that it's going to produce something pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and I know you and I are just meeting for the first time for this interview, but I have 0% fear when it comes to wondering what will come of this collaboration and what's already been produced. I mean, the proof is in the paranormal pudding, as they say. And the pudding is delicious so far because you got to see these first two volumes of Shadows in the Static. Matthew, take us home with letting us know, maybe just in general, like how you view um, the overall concept of, the scary side of the paranormal, right? And what we're talking about here, and the concept of fear. Um, Take us home with your thoughts in general about how you approach that just like what's your overall approach to that and your thoughts on this.
Well, you know, I've, I think I've been lied to so much through these boxes and devices that, I've heard so many disturbing things. I've, I've had so many terrible things thrown at me, off and on during these sessions. And then I've also heard like super nice things, super sweet things. I've been called handsome. I mean,
That's like, if you can't believe the other stuff, you can't believe the good stuff,
you
right?
can't believe any
That's
of
what
it. Yeah, you
comedians
got to
say
throw it
about
all out.
audience members after a show. Like, if you're not going to believe someone who says you suck, you can't believe someone who said you're the best.
Yes, right.
It's like
That's
you
right.
either have to believe them all or believe none of them.
Yeah. So I think at some point I just became appreciative and fascinated by the fact that this type of communication is even plausible. So I think it's my excitement that this is, regardless of what's facilitating it, whether it's the paranormal trickster or if it's Satan or if
Yeah.
it's whomever, it's like crazy that's even happening. It's like, I talked to a fallen angel today. I mean,
Yeah.
me. He talked to me. I mean, who talked to you? So, I mean, kind of regardless of whatever is behind it, it's so mind blowing to think that there is this, presence, whether it's, on the other side of the veil, whether it's, deceased humans or these interdimensional beings or whomever is behind it, or maybe it's a little bit of all of it. But just to have the ability to tap into it and to listen and to see what you might get out of it, just, I don't know, kind of puts me, I'm more excited than I am fearful at this point, regardless of what I might hear, because I don't really know how much influence they can really have on you physically unless you allow that to happen or accept it or let it in, or because I think then you kind of manifest it. So I've always tried to view this as almost like a wartime reporter. Like, yeah, I'm on the front line, but guess what? I don't have a gun. So hopefully nobody shoots me. So that's always kind of been, I've always kind of taken more of the observer route, even though I know that I'm my boots are strapped up and I'm in it. I've always kind of felt a little disconnected from it all, even though that I'm the one turning on the box. I'm the one asking the questions,
That's really cool. I love this idea of the wartime reporter.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been great. And there's at least a handful of things I didn't even get into. Oh shit. I forgot to even bring up the thing about the color of the earrings. And because I really wanted to talk about that and another time. And also the word technician, which is a conversation I'd like to have another time as well. April, Matthew, this has been amazing. Thank you for doing this. I'm very excited for people to be watching Shadows in the Static, the Slaughter Sessions. It's available at paraholics.com, also on the YouTube of Paraholics. You can easy find that on your internets. aprilslaughter.com, I believe, is the link to all things April. Is there any other place you'd like people to be directed, April, to find your stuff out there?
No, aprilslaughter.com is perfect. You'll only find the Slaughter Sessions, Shadows in the Static on Paraholics. So Matthew exclusively has that on his channels and his website.
Yeah, and links to the books, at least 2 of the books, are on the website as well. And yeah, and so, oh gosh, I mean, I'm so excited about the future of this, and I love what's already been done. Can't wait to see more. Very much looking forward to it, and definitely have to have a follow-up conversation here, sometime down the road when we're all in the free and clear, and we can talk about everything if you're up for it. So thanks again for doing it. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, pal. I appreciate it. Anytime, that.
Yeah. Oh man. I mean, God, I just want people to understand how cool this is. You know what I mean? Like,
that's the excitement.
If I could just show up to if you need me to come to your house to watch these with you, I will do that. Reach out to me. Thanks again for listening. I hope you're taking care of yourselves out there. Hope to see you at a live comedy show sometime on the road. My tour schedule is updated. I'll be in Indianapolis next Friday. Just booked that today as part of the MiddleGround Festival. I am a late edition replacement. So if you're in the Indiana area, wink, wink.
Yeah.
This today. This is going up tomorrow, by the way. So at the MiddleGround Comedy Festival on Friday night, I'll be headlining the show. So I hope to see you there if you're in Indiana. RyanSingerComedy.com/tour has all my dates. And then, like I said, Mount Shasta in 2 weeks to continue the conversations from the Bridge Paranormal Doc series. Okay, we'll see you soon. If not, we'll see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.